My project's on mental health disorders, more specifically, an anxiety disorder called selective mutism. Selective mutism usually occurs in children just starting school, and only 1 in 1,000 children have selective mutism. The reason I chose to do this topic is because I suffer from selective mutism. I was diagnosed with selective mutism when I was only 4 years old. We went to my aunt's house for Thanksgiving one year, and the only adults I would talk to were my parents, my grandparents, and that's it. My mom decided to look more into selective mutism, so she went to a selective mutism talk in Long Island where she met my soon-to-be therapist, Larissa. When I went to school every day from preschool to 2nd grade, I wouldn't talk to any of my teachers. I only spoke one word to my kindergarten teacher and my 1st grade teacher, one word the entire year, because that was part of my getting through selective mutism. It was part of my therapy sessions. I had to go and talk, just stand in the hallway, say one word to each of my teachers, that's it. I was always comfortable around kids until I got a little bit older. I was always still comfortable with them, it was just a little bit more nerve-wracking and not as calm. Other than my parents and my grandparents, I would only talk to a select few other adults. I was very picky about what adults I would talk to, and the reasoning of me talking to them was very odd. It varied from different people. When I would get very anxious, the way I would cope with my stress was I would rub my chin against my shoulder like this. My mom always told me that when I did that and she saw me doing that, she knew how nervous I got because I would only do that in extremely anxious situations. So she would just feel so bad because she knew how nervous I got. On the 3rd day of 2nd grade, I finally talked to one of my teachers. I remember coming home and telling my mom, being so excited that I had finally talked to one of my teachers. The biggest reason after I started to talk to my teachers that I wouldn't talk was because I was afraid that adults would make a big scene about me talking. I really didn't like it when people had a lot of attention on me because it would make me very anxious and I wouldn't know what to do. As I got older, I started to handle my selective mutism a lot better, and the only places I still don't like to talk to is in restaurants. When I said before I started to get a little bit more anxious around kids my age, that started to happen when I was in middle school. I can still always talk to people with no problem. It's just like sometimes, depending on who it is, I just get a little bit more anxious than I would have when I was younger. There was one time in 8th grade when I really remember when I let my selective mutism get the best of me. As you would probably assume, getting up in front of a lot of people would make me very anxious because, as I said before, I didn't like it when everyone's attention was just on solely me. That day in class, we had to do piano performances in front of everyone in the class, so you were the only one playing the piano, showing everyone what you had learned in that unit. When my teacher came up to me and said, "Abby, you're gonna go next," I just looked at her and I didn't know what to do. I didn't think that it was gonna make me really, really anxious or nervous because I knew everyone really well in that class, but I don't know what happened, but something just came over me where I just got super, super nervous, and I just looked at her and just kept repeating the word no. I couldn't do it. So as she just kept looking at me, she didn't know what was wrong, and I just started to shake and I started to cry, and my best friend sat next to me in that class, and she had to take me out of the room and bring me to the counseling office because no one knew what was happening because it had never happened before. As of today, selective mutism is still something that I live with. For example, last week when I had to go to a funeral, my uncle asked me to do a reading. He was one of the only adults that I talked to when I was younger, when I wouldn't talk to any adults. Every single person in that audience, other than my dad and my grandma and my aunt and my uncle, I wouldn't talk to. I still really don't talk to them. I talk to them when I have to, but I won't go up to them first and say, "Hello, how are you," whatever. It just makes me so nervous. So I walked up there and I put the sheet down that I had to read off of. I didn't even look up from the sheet. I just stared straight at the sheet. I said it as fast as I could, even though my dad told me go slow, and you'll be fine, just as slow as you can. I went as slow as I could, and I still sped through it as fast as I could. That sounded really bad, but and after I got back to my pew, I got so anxious that everyone thought that I did badly that I started to shake and cry again. It was not a good time, but that just shows that even now as a 15-year-old, I still get those instances where I get so nervous that I just start to shake and cry because I can't deal with my anxiety about talking. My selective mutism now is not nearly as severe as it was when I was younger, but I still have to deal with it on a regular basis. At times which include answering questions in class, giving presentations in class, and meeting with people. But my biggest fear of all is ordering at restaurants. Still to this day, I will not order my food for myself at a restaurant. My mom or my dad or my sister still have to do that for me because I just freeze up and I can't do it. Living with selective mutism is a very hard thing, but it has taught me so many good lessons. Selective mutism has made my life a bit harder than other people's, but it is also a lot easier than some things that other people are going through. Even though my selective mutism will continue throughout my entire life on a day-to-day basis, it will get better and easier each day I live with it. My next theme that ties into selective mutism is communication styles. As you probably can tell, communicating is really hard to do with selective mutism. Having that barrier of not being able to talk to each other, me and a teacher or me and an adult, it would just be really hard to show them I acknowledged what they were saying, I knew what I was doing, whatever. So some of the communication styles that are really good for me are texting, because that relieves a lot of anxiety about talking to people because it's just words. Writing. There's really not much that I know to do other than writing and texting. Even when I talk on the phone with people, I still get very, very nervous and anxious, so that's not a good way for me to talk. Also, talking to people is still very, very nerve-wracking for me. I can email people with no problem. I can message them anyway without having to physically use my voice. But when it comes to having to speak or use my voice in any manner, I just can't do it. I don't know what happens. Some kids describe it as they feel like there's a monster taking their tongue away, so they can't talk, even though they can talk in some situations, but in certain situations they feel like there's something inside of them taking their tongue away, so they just can't. It's really hard to understand why people with selective mutism don't talk. It's really hard to explain it too. A lot of people just ask, well, why don't you just talk? Why not? Like, I don't understand what's stopping you. And I understand where those people are coming from, but they don't understand where I'm coming from and saying, I can't. Well, you're talking right now. Why can't you talk to these people or those people? I can't. It's just, there's something in my mind that goes off and it's like, don't. Just not allowed to. I don't know. Selective mutism is a really, really weird disorder that I don't know how I developed it. I don't know what made me stop talking. Because before I was diagnosed with it, I would talk to anyone, and then after I was 4 or 5, I would just not speak to anyone. I would on some occasions I wouldn't even talk to my own father, which is really weird because I talk to him every single day now. But when I was younger, he would come back from work after I went to sleep, and he would leave before I woke up in the morning. So I would never really see him. And people I didn't see on a regular basis, I did not like talking to. I didn't like interacting with them at all. So the only times I would see my dad were on weekends. So I just wouldn't really feel comfortable with him, and in the summers I would spend the summers at the beach so I wouldn't see him for those 3 months either. So that's where it was coming from, where it would make me very, very nervous around him. I just tried to block out that he was there, and sometimes I would even say to my mom, "Is Daddy coming over for dinner, not is Dad coming home for dinner?" Now that I think back on it, it's so weird to me that I wouldn't even talk to my own dad, and that's just an example of how severe that could have gotten. If I would talk to my mom and my grandparents, and that's it. I lived with my dad and I wouldn't talk to him. Just kind of went on a rant for that. But selective mutism is really hard to understand, and I just hope more people who have it get diagnosed with it, and more parents can understand it as well as my parents did. I just want to thank my parents for dealing with my selective mutism every single day of my life, and them being able to put up with ordering at restaurants for me when I'm 15 years old, and understanding so well what I had to go through during that time, and not thinking that I was faking it, or that I was being dramatic, or that I was being silly, because that's what a lot of people think. A lot of people think that I'm just faking it for attention, and that I just don't want to talk to people. I just hate people. I just am being silly, I'm being overdramatic, whatever. But I'm not. It's an actual anxiety disorder that a lot of people have. And my parents were really, really good about it, and I appreciate it a lot.